Good morning, everyone. We'd like to ask everyone to please take their seats. We'd like to start the program. Refreshments will be available the entire conference, so no need to worry about that. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to MERC's milestone 30th annual conference with the theme of navigating the rough waters of the economy. And as a milestone year, it's only appropriate that we are back in person this year for the first time since the pandemic. So it's good to see everyone in person. My name is David Bennett from Middlesex Savings Bank, and I serve as chair of the advisory board. And since 1991, MERC has done a fantastic job fulfilling its mission of delivering economic research, education through internship, and economic outreach in an extraordinary fashion. They've had the opportunity to study and analyze the economy through expansions, recessions, changing demographics, and even a pandemic. The goal of today's conference, Navigating the Rough Waters of the Economy, is to emphasize the mixed messages we are currently observing in the global and national economy, and how Greater Metro West fits this into the picture. I'd like to thank our sponsors to start with, first of all, Framingham State University, Eversource, the Metro West Chamber of Commerce, Avidia Bank, Main Street Bank, Cohen Heating and Air Conditioning, and Middlesex Savings Bank, as well as Mass Hire. So thank you all for supporting today's conference. Of course, thank you to our speakers for today's conference, for taking time out of your busy schedules to help us all better understand how our local economy is going to navigate these rough waters. I'd also like to take a moment to recognize administrators of Framingham State and thank them for their support of MERC. First of all, our president, Nancy Nemi, Christian Porter Utley, provost and VP of Academic Affairs. Both of them, this is their first conference, so welcome. We also have Dale Hamill, Executive VP of Administration, Finance, and Technology. Dale over there. Rima Zinaldin, Associate VP for Academic Affairs, Operations, Finance, and Institutional Effectiveness. And Patricia Thomas, Dean of the College of Business, who has graciously offered to be our moderator today. Finally, thank you to the MERC interns for all of their hard work, the MERC faculty and the Board of Advisors for making MERC what it is today. I now have the privilege of introducing our first speaker, Dr. Nancy Nemi, President of Framingham State University. Nancy Nemi's commitment to social equity through education is evidenced in her work with universities across the country and in her research throughout her career. She proudly serves as the president of Framingham State University, and her experience in education includes positions as provost and vice president for academic affairs of the University of Maryland East Shore, inaugural director of faculty teaching initiatives at Yale University, professor and chair of education at the University of New Haven, and as an elected public school board member. Nancy works with her team at Framingham State University, which has responded to public need for the good of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for 183 years, to develop the strongest educational opportunities for students and their families who form the new majority of America. Through community connections, business partnerships, and powerful programs, Nemi and her team are fierce developers of impactful education in Metro West and across New England. Nemi has published widely on social equity and on curriculum and instruction. Most recently, she co-authored Course Design and Assessment and co-edited the Handbook of Gender Equity in Higher Education. Her book, Degrees of Difference, Women, Men, and the Value of Higher Education, explored the relationship between women's dominance in college degree completion and the U.S. sociocultural gender equity. Please join me for a warm welcome for President Niemi.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. There's a lot of past when you get to this point. And about a year ago, I threw out a first pitch at a Woo Sox game, which was terrifying enough for me. I love baseball, can't play it to save my life. But as I had submitted a bio to them, 2 sentences. You know, I'm a new president of Framingham State and I love baseball, something to that effect. They found that bio instead on the web and they started reading it. I'm on the mound, terrified, just trying to make sure I throw the pitch right. And they're talking about this and nobody cares. So I like, please just get to the end of it. I just want to throw this, but thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Welcome to Framingham State University. As David said, we're delighted to have you here this morning and to see you in person. I was here last year when you were on Zoom, but I was brand new, hadn't even officially started yet. So it's really wonderful to see you face to face. I think you'll agree that the connection and communication that comes from face-to-face understanding just far surpasses Zoom. And the importance of communication might not seem evident to a group whose mission is to collect and analyze data from across a region. The kind of data MERC analyzes doesn't require necessarily all of us to be here face to face to look at each other in order to parse what the trends are and figure out what impacts there might be. But I think that as we gather in person again, and why it remains vital. The data for which MERC takes responsibility impacts people's lives. And in order to conduct their analyses, the faculty and interns and other folks at MERC have to take the time in dialogue and collective research to make many decisions about the data they use. For example, deciding what kinds of information is worth gathering in the first place, and whether the data they've been using remains good indicators of economic health. Whether there are missing data or new data based on new or changing economic conditions, and what the current non-economic conditions tell them about the context in which they are conducting analyses. I'm a big believer in thinking about things in context. I've often wanted to tattoo it right on my forehead. It's about the context. And that matters even as we have the ability to collect greater and greater amounts of data. What you do with it is what matters. All of these decisions and many more need human debate and dialogue. And that's really it's really only possible when people are face to face and not on mute or off camera or multitasking or half interested. We're all guilty of it. I know it's really hard to pay attention when you've got other things in front of you. And when you're here, you hopefully can't do that. You're going to look at each other and talk. These decisions about data collection and analysis are important, because everyone in all of our communities are deeply impacted by the economy and its health. Housing, food, schooling, all of these are impacted and impact economic conditions. And if we're to be true to our mission at MERC and at FSU to serve all of the people of our community, then we need to take the dialogic time to discuss, debate, and decide how we're going to use these data to help shape policy and the community members as we make decisions about our economic health. We need to look at each other and ask how our economic health impacts social equity. This is the importance of what you do here. Such important things to contemplate before you've had your second cup of coffee even. I want to state, city, and the Metro West communities. We need you. I hope you have a successful dialogic day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Niemi, for the opening remarks. Good morning, everyone. My name is Fakhlino Suib. I'm currently the co-director of MERC and also professor of economics here at Framingham State University. I'm delighted to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Mark Melnick. A little bit about Mark. He is currently the director of economic and public policy research at UMass Donahue Institute. He specializes in demographic, socioeconomic and labor market issues and leads 20+ person team working on different economic and public policy research projects. Dr. Melnick has served as the principal in charge on project with different type of clients, including the Secretary of the Commonwealth, the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, the Boston Foundation, the City of Boston, the City of Cambridge, and others. In addition, Dr. Melnick served as the Senior Managing Editor of Mass Benchmark, the Journal of the Massachusetts Economy published by the Institute in cooperation with the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Before joining the Institute, Dr. Melnick worked as Deputy Director for Research at the Boston Redevelopment Authority. And prior to that, he worked as a research associate at the Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy at Northeastern University. As the leading expert, Dr. Melnick is quoted extensively in the media and was appointed to the Governor Charlie Baker's Future of Transportation Commission and the Massachusetts Economic Development Council Board of Directors. He holds a doctorate in sociology from Northeastern University and received his Master of Arts from Northeastern University and his Bachelor of Arts from Youngstown State University, all in sociology. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. Melnick.
Need these. All right, there we go. Hey, I'm Mark Melnick. I direct economic and public policy research at the Donahue Institute. If I step, are you doing a Zoom thing with this or a broadcasting thing with this? It's just on that. Okay, I like to walk around. I direct economic and public policy research at the Donahue Institute. It was nice to be back in person and doing these events again. It's been a while of doing Zooms and giving different economic talks. I may or may not have had pants on. Nobody would have known. But those first handful of times that I've gotten back out there, and worrying about like, will the top button and all those things. It's definitely great to have the energy of being around folks again. It was also a little jarring to notice that I actually am wearing the same clothes as my headshot. That's not a normal situation, but in any case, the moment it flashed up there, I'm like, I think I'm wearing the same tie. So, okay, so the Donahue Institute is a public service and economic development arm of the UMass Amherst campus. And at the Institute, we touch a lot of different aspects of civic and social and cultural life in Massachusetts. One of those things is the production of a journal called Mass Benchmarks, where we take nerd economic stuff and then translate it into a public policy context. And with that, plus the consulting research that we do at the Institute, I get the opportunity to speak a lot around the state on different economic issues, and it's been informed by the things that we do in benchmarks and the things that we do in our research. And it's a lot of fun, both to keep analyzing the data in that way, but then also getting into the different parts of the state and talking with folks about some of the micro things that they see in the economy, because a lot of what I'm talking about gets more at the macro. Right now, I'm doing the roadshow a ton. We've been lucky to be invited by the governor's office to present at each of the regional listening sessions that the state's doing right now as part of their economic development plan. And I think it's a really unique opportunity right now to be talking about the Massachusetts economy at a high level because we're at a moment where we're seeing a lot of inflection points coming together. We have this post-COVID recovery and what the economy looks like now, and what the future of the economy is going to be like, and how the economy's changed. But at the same time, it's running headlong into some other broader demographic challenges that we have that are going to inhibit economic competitiveness in the long term. And in fact, in a room like this, a lot of you folks would be familiar with this, but for the last 20 years, labor economists have been highlighting and commenting on the aging baby boomers and what this was going to mean for the labor force long term. Well, we shut down the world for 2 years, but one thing that definitely happened was we kept getting older. And so now we sit here in 2023 and we're seeing a lot of these demographic headwinds for the first time. And then all of that, coupled with the broader policy challenges that we already had in Massachusetts around housing costs and transportation and so on. So I think a lot of the presentations that I've been doing now really focus on those. What's really nice about today, though, is while I've been doing these regional road shows for the state, they only give me 15 minutes and you guys are giving me a half hour. So I have all this extra elbow room and a lot of the deeper cuts that are now back in the slide deck for today. So let me start first by showing this graphic. This is Massachusetts at a glance. I saw somebody take a picture already of the slides. Donna, I hope you can share the slides with folks because it's, yeah. Yeah, no, it was totally you, but yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy to have this slide shared afterwards. Massachusetts at a glance, these are some of the key indicators that we really have been looking at lately. First and foremost, unemployment in Massachusetts is 3.3%. If you would have told me 2 years ago that summer of 2023 we would have historically low unemployment, I wouldn't believe you. But there aren't a lot of analogs to a self-imposed recession like the COVID crisis, and our recovery has been, pretty robust or pretty good given the circumstances, especially when we compare it to, say, the Great Recession, which had much stickier unemployment. U6 has come down pretty dramatically as well. U6 is a measure of folks who are currently unemployed as well as those who are part-time but would like to be full-time. That unemployment rate right now is 6.3%. Comparatively, during the Great Recession, we would see the unemployment rate come down, but U6 be kind of stubborn. And so we would have job creation happening, but that job creation would be part-time work, which really was not a great indicator of where the economy really was, right? But right now we're seeing our U6 has come down a good amount. Between the 2010 and 2020 census, Massachusetts grew 7.4%. That made us right on the U.S. average and had us far above all the other states in New England. But in the last 2 years, and especially in the last year, there's been a lot of attention about population loss in Massachusetts. And over the last 2 years, we lost about 1% of our total population in the state. That loss has largely been driven by domestic outmigration and a dramatic increase in domestic outmigration over the last 2 years. I'm going to touch on that a little bit more later, but this gets again into some of the demographic headwinds I mentioned at the top. Job growth has been pretty good over the last year. We've grown about 2.7%. It's a slowdown from the immediate recovery period, but still important, but still decent. 17.6% of Massachusetts is foreign-born. We have the 7th largest percentage of foreign-born residents in the U.S. The immigrant story is a critical story in thinking about the Massachusetts economy and the growth of the Massachusetts economy over the last several decades. In fact, 80% of the labor force growth in Massachusetts since 1990 has been because of growth in immigrant labor. And importantly, our immigrant labor has a really interesting set of demographic characteristics as well. We have a really bimodal distribution in our immigrant population. We have a lot of folks with limited educational attainment, less than high school. But we also have a significant part of the immigrant population in Massachusetts with advanced education. In fact, a higher percentage of foreign-born residents in Massachusetts have a graduate degree than native-born. And it's an important part of driving our knowledge-based industries in the state. Our median age is 40, which makes us the 17th oldest state in the nation. And 46.6% of Massachusetts has a college degree. That's the most in the U.S. The other thing we're the most in the U.S. is highest per capita income. Massachusetts is the richest state in the country. Per capita income in Massachusetts is $82,000 compared to $63,000 in the U.S. I like showing this graphic because it gets at a couple of things. One is it highlights the industry mix that we have in the state. We have a lot of high wage growth industries in the knowledge sector. But I also think it's important because when I throw this up here and I say to folks, we're the richest state in the country, I think at least half of you probably thought, well, why don't I feel that rich? And so there's a lot of things that are happening inside of there, both in terms of cost of living things in the state, but then also broader equity issues where we see significant differences in the economic experience demographically and geographically around Massachusetts. So first, let's talk a little bit about why we see the distribution that we see. This graph here looks at the distribution of industries in Massachusetts. That's the red, and the orange is the U.S. And what I'd like to highlight here is just where we have strengths in Massachusetts, the most important of which is healthcare and social assistance. Not surprisingly, we have amazing anchor not surprising anybody in this room, we have amazing anchor institutions in Massachusetts around the eds and meds. And we have a high concentration of work in healthcare. And then if you look a little further down in educational services, with 6% of our jobs are in eds compared to 3% nationally. So it's twice the proportion. The other part I love highlighting, though, here, and I think is critically important, is professional business services. It's a terribly named sector for folks. It's a terribly named. something's happening. Okay, I'll just advance that way. The professional business services include things like biotech, life sciences, high tech, high wage sectors of the economy, and they've been in really important parts of both growing the Massachusetts economy the last couple of decades, but beyond that, they've really grown dramatically since COVID. And really stands out as an important part of the Massachusetts story. Now, I already talked about inequity a little bit in the state, demographically and geographically. This graph gets at that a little bit more. This is per capita income in comparing per capita income by race in the US and in Massachusetts. So Massachusetts is the red, US is the orange. On the far left, we see the total. So that's that 82 and 63 that I showed you at the beginning. But then what we did was we deconstructed this a little bit more to see how per capita income looks different by racial group. And not surprisingly, there's significant per capita income differences for white and Asian households in Massachusetts compared to Black and in Hispanic. This is talking about per capita income, right? This is not about wealth. So probably the most significant aspect of inequity in Massachusetts is the wealth gap. And the legendary Boston Fed piece from several years back about how the median wealth of a Black family in Greater Boston was being $7. What we see here is this is about income and shows that difference here about just the wages that folks are seeing in the labor market right now. Talking again about like, why don't you feel that rich? Well, we have the most educated population and the highest per capita income, but we also have the 5th most expensive childcare, the 4th most expensive electricity, the 3rd most expensive natural gas, 5th most expensive home values, and the 2nd worst traffic. So that's all the broader quality of life things. And I think, and I do it partly as a joke, but I think it talks about that broader competitiveness issue in the state already. All right, so some other bigger picture things about the economy right now. This next graphic dates back to 1976 and looks at unemployment in Massachusetts compared to the US. Mass is the red and the US is the orange. And I think one of the things I like to highlight out of this is just where we see kind of how the economy changes over different points over time and where the Massachusetts economy separates from the US. The Massachusetts miracle, which we see like in the 80s, we have the lower unemployment rate. The other orientation thing. The gray vertical bars are recessions. The thickness of the gray bar is how long the recession took place. So you can see where the Great Recession takes place there in that, in the 2008 to like 2010 range. And you see the COVID recession is actually quite short. But anyway, one of the things that I want to highlight here is just how the makeup of the Massachusetts economy changes over time. And it really, we see this difference between Mass and the US and that separation of unemployment. It's most acute in what happened in the Great Recession. Our unemployment did not spike nearly to the same extent as the rest of the US. A lot of the Great Recession impacted construction and retail. While we have that in Massachusetts, it's some of our leading industries, the ones I was mentioning before, were not hammered as hard. And we see that unemployment change. And we stay lower through much of the recovery period. And then when the recession happens, we end up with the highest unemployment in the nation. When I was doing these by Zoom in the summer of 2020, it was like this terrifying apocalypse kind of thing because you'd have this graphic and then the unemployment rate just shoots up to the sky. So like now at least it's come back down. But we had some of the highest unemployment in the nation because New England and the northeastern part of the US had some of the earliest outbreaks of COVID. So states like New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts had extremely high unemployment. And we had some pretty robust social distancing policies as well. But now, again, as I mentioned, historically low unemployment. This next graphic gets at some of the inequity issues that we've seen in the economy. The COVID recession was the most unequal recession on record. And the one that it beat was the one before that. So we've had a couple of recessions. The last couple of recessions have really disproportionately impacted people on the lower end of the income and educational attainment scale. This graphic gets at that. It's a little bit tough to look at as the spaghetti, but I think the important things to highlight here is first on the left, we're looking at unemployment differences by race in Massachusetts. And when white folks are the red, Black or green, and Hispanic blue. And what I think is important to highlight here is just the degree to which unemployment dramatically spikes for communities of color during the recession. Industries that relied on face-to-face interaction were the ones that were most negatively impacted by the recession. And we see, like, for example, folks in the Hispanic community saw unemployment rates reaching 40%. during the height of COVID. And now things have kind of come to a normal-ish range, but what we're seeing is this disruption really disproportionately impacting those folks at the lower end of the income scale. Similarly, when we look at educational attainment, we see the same effect. Blue are folks with less than a bachelor's degree, and gray are folks with a college degree. And then we see folks with a less than a bachelor's degree at the height of the COVID crisis with an unemployment rate over 25%. What I think is also important to highlight here is just when we think about challenges in hiring right now, there is a skills mismatch issue in Massachusetts, broadly speaking. Unemployment rate for folks with a college degree is extraordinarily low right now at under 2%. Folks with less than a college degree, unemployment is around 7%. So when we see some issues about employers having a hard time filling vacancies, that's part of the issue. Like, what's the available army of labor for filling jobs? This next graph looks at job loss in Massachusetts over the pandemic period. We lost about 700,000 jobs over the recession, and I'm excited to say, or over the COVID crisis, and I'm excited to say that over the last 2 months, we actually have crossed the threshold over our pre-pandemic peak, so that's good. And so I had been doing this for a long time with nothing on the top of the scale, so it's really great to have something there now. How do we compare to other states? Well, this graphic here takes all the states in the US and looks at the jobs recovery. We right now rank 30. I had to look back and check again because we update this every show. So we're 34th in the nation right now, which isn't terribly exciting. But as you can see from the graphic, there's a lot of states that are kind of clumped together between that 101 and 99 range. US is about 2.5 percentage points above where it was pre-pandemic. I also find it interesting to point out just the degree to which we still have lagging in leisure and hospitality broadly. I don't often highlight Hawaii when I give presentations about the Massachusetts economy, but you can see how the degree to which the Hawaii economy is still struggling. And in our case, we're still below pre-peak with our leisure and hospitality sector. This graphic gets that a little bit more. This is a barbell graphic that we do on job recovery. On the top are the list of industries in Massachusetts with fewer jobs today than they had pre-pandemic. So the orange is the jobs you lost, and the red are the jobs you gained. So on the bottom, those are all industries that have more jobs now than they did during the initial strike of COVID. So leisure, hospitality, and food services is still about 27,000 jobs below pre-pandemic peak. Retail still 20,000 below pre-pandemic peak. Other services, about 5,000, which is obviously a lame industry name, but includes things like barbershops, mechanic shops, hair salons, so a lot of personal services kind of things. And then for those that have more jobs today, I think the most exciting to point out is professional business services, where it gains 50,000 jobs from its pre-pandemic, from its pandemic loss. Now, in the last year, the recovery, and that's the entire period, right? In the last year, we've seen growth in a lot of different areas. Leisure and hospitality, while it's still way behind where it was pre-pandemic, has actually grown pretty decently over the last year, and about 4% job growth in leisure and hospitality. Business and professional services continues to grow significantly. So it's exciting for that sector and one that's really, again, been very important for our economy for a while. One of the things we do at Mass Benchmarks is, well, we produce 3 main things in Mass Benchmarks right now. We do the journal. We have a board note that we do where economists get together and we talk about what's happening in the economy. And then we have a current and leading index report that we do that compares the current state of the economy and then projects out where we expect Massachusetts' growth to go. This is the latest version of our leading index, and this compares Massachusetts gross domestic product change versus the US. 2021, there was pretty robust growth in gross domestic product, but it kind of rickshawed back and forth between like, were we growing faster than the US, were the US growing faster than us? And I think part of this were just functions of like our high wage sectors and like when certain reopening things were happening. In early 2022, we had 2 consecutive quarters of negative gross domestic product change. That is actually one of the technical definitions of a recession, but was, the way this normally gets defined in the Bureau of Economic Research, they burn smoke and there's the white smoke thing, and they decide like, okay, now it's a recession. It's usually after the recession already happened, but it was hard to call something a recession when you had job gains and unemployment that was approaching historically low levels. And then we have this recovery period afterwards, and the economy was doing well at the end of 2022. Right now, we've seen significant slowdowns though, and part of this I think is demographically driven. We're actually projecting it at benchmarks that negative gross domestic product growth over the rest of 2023. But I think, and a lot of that's driven by just compressions on the labor supply available in the state. Inflation, a lot of talk about inflation, although it's kind of chilled over the last, better part of the year. Right now for the U.S., inflation is about 5% year over year. For Boston Metro, 4.7. For the Northeast, 3.8. So we look pretty similar, but it has been coming down, and I think the Fed's efforts to tamp down inflation were effective. But how do we look different? This next graphic here looks at year-over-year price changes for the U.S. in Boston Metro. And the part I wanted to highlight was the increase in fuel and utilities. I live in Natick. We brought into a town energy thing. And I get a letter in November that says, hey, guys, the contract ended. The bill's going to look different next month. And I study this stuff. And then I get the next bill, and it's twice as much as it was the month before. So I had to call the kids upstairs, and we're like, okay, we're going to have a family meeting. You really have to turn the lights off now when you come upstairs. So, all right. So this next graphic here gets at the labor supply stuff I was talking about before. There were a lot of dumb stories about, oh, people don't want to work and they're getting paid to stay home, and the challenges employers were having in hiring. And employers were having a hard time hiring, and I'm sure that there were examples of people who didn't want to work. But really what was happening is that in the aggregate, we have fewer workers now than we did pre-pandemic, and this graphic shows this. So in April 2019, we have about 3.8 million workers in Massachusetts. You can see the trough here in April 2020 of 3.4 million workers. You could date when schools reopen with where the labor supply changes happen. And in part because we talked a lot about a C-session early in the pandemic. Labor force participation rates for women plummeted. And then, obviously, and now it has come back up to normal levels. Our labor force participation rates in Massachusetts are where they were pre-pandemic. Problem is we have fewer workers and fewer working aged workers now than we did pre-pandemic. And so taking us ahead to 2023 April, and we have 3.7 million workers. This is my favorite graphic we do at the Donahue Institute. Because I think it tells so many different parts of the story of Massachusetts' change, both demographically and economically. In terms of demographics, just casting your eyes on the international migration graphic, Massachusetts' racial makeup has shifted a lot over the last couple of decades, and a lot of that's been driven by increases in the Hispanic and Asian communities. And that's been driven by immigration. But kind of breaking this down, we see the birth and death at the top. That's our natural increase, and we have more birth now than we do death, and we have historically. Some states have seen that flip. There's some parts of our state that have seen that flip, and we're approaching death coming closer to birth. There were some things in here that were COVID-driven. The death rate goes up. And despite stupid stories early in the pandemic, where it's like, we're going to have all these pandemic babies in 9 months. The only way that was going to happen was if you didn't have any kids yet, because as somebody with 2 kids, my wife and I could not find any time alone at the beginning of the pandemic. But people generally don't have kids during an economic crisis, right? And the birth rates kind of came down. In Massachusetts, we have a very well-educated female population with high labor force participation rate. So our birth rates are already kind of depressed. So we have a positive natural increase. Now let's talk about migration. Domestic out-migration has dropped. We've seen a ton of domestic out-migration in Massachusetts, and historically we've been net losers in domestic migration. What I want to highlight here is the difference between signal and noise. The amount of loss that we're seeing in the last year or two, I think that could be noise, in the sense that there's a lot of shifts and changes that we're seeing in living patterns driven by COVID. We saw some sections of the state have dramatic increases in people in 2021, and then comes back down to normal in 2022, the Cape, the Berkshires. So I do think there's going to be a normalization about that, but the signal, The signal is the whole 20 years. We've been losing people to domestic migration for a long, long time. And so what has counteracted that has been international migration. Our amount of international migration has counteracted our domestic out migration. So we've been gaining population that entire time. So what happens? So over the Trump administration, immigration slows down, some policy changes, I think some rhetoric, and it just kind of chilling some of the things around immigration. But more importantly, we don't have any immigration in 2020 and 2021. So that's also a part of why we have fewer workers now than we had pre-pandemic, because we didn't import folks for a couple of years. That in total ends up driving some of this the story around domestic migration. This drills down at this a little bit more. We have some pretty cool stuff on our website that gets at each part of the state on this. There was a lot of noise in 2020 and between 2020 and 2021 in terms of change. So we see Suffolk County loses 3.3% of its population in that year, whereas Barnstable, Nantucket, Dukes have this dramatic increase, right? Fast forward to 2021, 2022, kind of looks a little bit more normal. This has been a real challenge because we were doing a housing study with folks in Cape Cod, and it's like, well, we think we're going to have more people coming to the Cape now than before. Okay, but what's the baseline we're going to draw it from? Is it going to be 2021? That doesn't seem realistic. So what is the thing that's going to drive that? And I think those are the things demographically that continue to move. This next graphic gets at some of the things I'm talking about, demographic patterns. This is an age pyramid. In 2010, we had a very classic age pyramid in Massachusetts where 12% of our population was 65 or over. At the Donahue Institute, we do population projections for all the cities and towns in Massachusetts. And so what you're seeing on the right is the population projection for 2050. And the age pyramid turns into a rectangle. And by 2050, we're expecting about a quarter of the population to be 65 or over. That's what, to show it in a different way, if we took current day labor force participation rate and applied it to the age profile that I just showed you, that gives us the broken line on labor force projection for the state. So between, I did that terribly, one more time. Okay, this graphic shows us labor force change in Massachusetts. From 1990 to 2020, well, Massachusetts labor force grew about 15%. If you take the age profile that I just presented to you and apply current day labor force participation rates to it, how does the labor force grow? Well, it grows very modestly over the next 30 years at about half the rate. So, and that's all because of that aging of the labor force. This graphic touches on that a bit more, where we look at what the labor force participation rates are by age group. And so then our prime working ages, 25 to 54, folks are working around 87, 88%. But as you get into the older age cohorts, we see a significant decline. And one might say, okay, we'll just have older workers will work longer. That may be true, but Massachusetts has the highest labor force participation for folks who are 65 and over. So that also raises how much blood from the stone can you squeeze. Another issue that comes up a bunch is housing prices in Massachusetts and cost. This here looks at cost burden. We have a higher cost burden in housing in Massachusetts than the rest of the nation. Cost burden is when you're spending 30% or more of your income on housing. Compared to the US at renters, it looks about the same, about half renters or housing cost burden. But we see significant cost burdens for owners in the state. 30% of owners with a mortgage are housing cost burdened in Massachusetts. 19% of owners without a mortgage. How are you cost burdened without a mortgage? You're cost burdened because you still have to pay utilities and taxes. And so folks who are on fixed incomes, still have to cover those costs, and that is a significant issue in the state. Remote work's getting a ton of attention, of course. We have the 4th highest rate of remote work in Massachusetts. A quarter of our workers are working remotely right now, compared to 18% for the US. But the folks who get to work remote is obviously connected to the types of work that you do in the skills that you have. So this graphic here looks at educational attainment and race in the rate of remote work. Folks with a college degree, graduate degree, 36% are working remotely. Folks with a bachelor's, 33%. When we look at race, Asian and white folks are much more likely to be working remotely. Not terribly surprising, but still stark nonetheless to see. This graphic is a little bit busy, but what I wanted to what we're showing here is the ghost bar is the size of the industry. And then the color inside of it is the percent of the workers in that industry that are working remote. So for example, in professional and technical services, significant industry in Massachusetts, 48% of those workers are working remote. And then you look at something like accommodation and food services, only 6%. And again, that seems to make a lot of sense. And when you look at occupation, similarly, 45% of computer and engineering and science are working remote, 39% of management, but folks in like production, which is, you know, classic manufacturing types of stuff, obviously that can't be remote. This graphic here maps remote work in Massachusetts. You can't do all the cities and towns with the 1 year. This is using the 2001 ACS. You can't do all the cities and towns with the 1 year ACS. You have to use 5-year data. The 5-year ACS data is problematic because it includes the period pre-COVID, right? So what we used instead here is the public use microdata sample available with the census. That's a long-winded nerd explanation for why you can't say, well, Framingham, or we actually can't do Framingham, but some of the smaller communities you wouldn't be able to do. So we use this instead. So it's kind of this, you know, kind of bastardized geographies, but I think still tells the story we want to tell is where are the remote workers? And I think what's important to highlight here is that while there's a certain level of free agency and where people can live and work, for us, a lot of the remote workers are in the affluent suburbs of Greater Boston. There isn't some dramatic number of remote workers in Pittsfield, right? What we're seeing is that in the affluent suburbs, and you know that's where it's much more common. Thinking about Metro West, I'll just highlight a similar at a glance look. Unemployment is dramatically low here, and we kind of use two different definitions here depending on data. We use the NECTA for Framingham and Middlesex County for the some of the other things. Though there is still a job deficit in the Framingham NECTA of about 10,000. Population has declined about 1% in Middlesex County, job growth a little bit below the state. Foreign-born population is huge in Middlesex County, 22.5%, and lower poverty as one might expect. And the number of folks with college degrees is approaching 60%. And we see a lot of that, you know, again, driven by some of the affluent suburbs outside of Boston. This next graphic gets at the housing burden issue that I mentioned before and maps it by county in Massachusetts just to see some of the differences. Housing burden is most significant in Suffolk County, which is Boston, mostly in a couple other towns north of it, Essex County, and then we see different parts of the Cape. Housing prices are higher here, but incomes are higher here too. So the housing burden isn't quite as significant, but there are issues that span across the state. And looking at how the industries look different here, healthcare and social assistance is significant in the region, but lags that behind the state. What I think is really important and interesting here is that manufacturing is really significant in the Framingham NECTA. And this area produces a lot of things in computers, electronics, as well as different things in the pharmaceutical industry. So it has twice the percentage of workers in manufacturing than the rest of the state, and professional and technical services right in line with the rest of the state. And just looking about how jobs have changed in the region, this is the same barbell graphic that we showed at the beginning for the state, but significant losses in trade and transportation. Manufacturing actually sustained some losses as well, education, healthcare, leisure, and hospitality, and then gains in things like, well, actually not a ton of gains that we see professional business services. This explains kind of the negative that we saw in the first graphic. In terms of population change in the region, the age profile isn't quite as stark as the rest of the state. So we see actually better labor force growth in Metro West. Labor force grew about 13% between 1990 and 2020. We projected to grow around 9% from 2020 to 2050. And with that, I'll stop here and happy to take questions. But I think the big issues right now, from my perspective, is just in order for the Massachusetts economy to really thrive over the next several decades, it's going to be important for us to be thinking about broader competitiveness issues and how to make it easier for folks to live and work in the state, as well as being really proactive about trying to goose labor force participation for populations who maybe haven't participated at high levels. I'm thinking in particular folks with disabilities, folks with limited educational attainment, folks with a criminal record. the ability to squeeze 5 or 10 percentage points of labor force participation out of populations that weren't working at high levels before, one is a moral issue, but is secondly a competitiveness one. And I think that kind of creative thinking is going to be really important in the coming decades for us to maintain the standard of living and the quality of an economy that we've come to enjoy the last several decades. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mark. So any questions from the audience?
Thank you, Mark. That was great. Is there a correlation between internet access and the remote work slide that you put up?
Yeah, that's great. I haven't actually compared that before, but that does make a lot of sense. And we've heard anecdotally challenges with internet access, particularly in some of the further reaches of the state. Massachusetts has done a pretty good job of expanding high-speed internet into some of the more rural areas over the last several years. I know when I first was doing these road shows, and I'd go up somewhere in Fitchburg, and folks would tell me that they were still running like the carbon versions of credit cards, and we're talking like 2013 or something like this. It's not that long ago. So yeah, I think that's definitely related, and you've given me a good idea for something to add to the roadshow. So we'll look into that more.
Any other questions?
In your data, you don't really have a lot about small business, which is sort of the economic growth for Metro West. Can you talk about how small business impacts in this, as opposed to large corporations and manufacturers?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, we don't have a lot of data in here, and another great on small business, and in part because some things have been on and off the shelf depending on where we were in the pandemic. Early in the pandemic, we had a lot of things on small business, and the Census Bureau had put out a really cool data series called The Pulse that was doing weekly collections on business owners and households and how the pandemic was affecting folks. Not surprisingly, small business owners were dramatically impacted during the COVID crisis. I think it'd be important to kind of explore a little bit more about how we're seeing recovery with small businesses going right now, especially as we see economies kind of shifting regionally. Like, I went to the same barber for 10 years, and now I only get my hair cut in Natick, but it used to be a guy who was like right next door to my office, right? So what's happening with those kinds of things? I know a lot of municipalities have put a lot of effort into different supports for small businesses, and we've been a part of that in the federal and doing studies in that. And the federal government had released some money in the Recovery Act to help with it. But I don't have any hard data on like how the distribution of small businesses have changed. But again, another great thing to add to a future roadshow.
Mark, do you see any correlation between enrollment and graduation rates in, say, public, private, and community colleges in the area, as far as your projections down the road for workforce?
So I think the biggest enrollment challenge that the colleges and universities are going to face is just this baby bust that we've had a couple of interruptions demographically that have slowed birth rate. So the Great Recession being one in particular, and I think that's going to start hitting colleges and universities real soon. And then whatever ended up happening with the COVID one. So I think that there are really big challenges long term for colleges and universities to maintain the level of enrollment that they had grown accustomed to. I think in terms of where the impacts are most acutely felt are especially for our regional state universities and our really small liberal arts colleges. Places that draw a lot on nearby resident population, and that region has gotten older. I'm thinking about, say, like the UMass Dartmouth area, for example. They face some really significant challenges when it comes to maintaining the enrollments that they need. And I think this raises, again, the issues with immigration again, because I think there's a lot of answers for us around the workforce and around for colleges and universities. Everything you're saying about workforce is just that same problem 4 years earlier, right? So I think that's the same thing that we would be seeing there. Your super competitive elite schools, Harvard, they're not going to have any problems, right? But it's the issues for your mid-size and your liberal arts colleges, which we've seen several of them already close in the state. So yeah, that's important and a different economic headwind for the state because we rely so heavily on colleges and universities.
Any other question? I think we can have two more questions.
This table, guys are great.
Considering that Massachusetts has such a high college graduation rate,
Yeah.
and our population happens to have a large work from home environment as well, do you think there's going to be any significant changes with the number of vacant lots there is going to be when it comes to office space?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing some of that now, and I have to admit I'm not an expert in commercial real estate, but I was chatting with a friend from NIOP the other day, and just the amount of vacancies or the ways in which transactions have happened, like those buildings that were selling for half what they were just a few years ago, right? So I do think that we'll see some significant changes there. I mean, it's interesting though, because I don't think work from home is the future. I think hybrid is the future. And if hybrid is the future, then I think that raises other interesting questions about space. Like if an office space isn't empty 100% of the time, but 40% of the time, what does that mean, right? So I think these are some things that are kind of unique versus saying like, oh, well, all the economic activity in the region was in Boston. And then 128 builds up and we see this kind of shift to the suburbs, right? And like what that meant to Boston. I don't think we're seeing a cultural thing quite like that, but I do think it does raise a bunch of interesting questions about like how we use space, there's been think pieces around, taking office spaces and how can we turn this into modular housing or these kinds of things. And I think they'll be super interesting to continue to consider, because I think one of the biggest issues we're faced with as a state is that we just have underproduced in housing for so long that it's going to take a long time to fix that. And that's, I think, a part of the other competitiveness side of things is like, how does young households form in Massachusetts? Because I was expecting your question to be around like, with all the colleges and universities, what's happening with young people? Because that's the push, right? When we looked at the out-migration story, and there's all these stories like, oh, it's the millionaire's tax or it's the death tax, and it's like that's your privilege showing when people say that. That's not what's moving the change, right? What's moving the change is 25 to 34-year-olds. Those were the ones who were the most significant out-migrants, and I think a lot of that has to do with, okay, I graduated, I got all this debt. How am I going to start a life in a place where I need $60,000 at least as a down payment to buy a house, right? So I think so our ways of finding creative housing solutions is, I think, a really important next step for making the state more livable.
One last question, perhaps.
Good morning. Traffic has definitely returned to the Metro West area and to the Boston area, even with hybrid. What is your view of how public transportation is going to affect economic development in the Metro West area?
Right. That's an excellent question, and one where, so I was on the Future Transportation Task Force years ago, and one of our top line policy recommendations was, doubling down on public transit. And it was, investing in the commuter rail system. I wholly endorse the MBTA community exercise to try to increase density around our public transit options. So I'm still a big believer in what the public transportation system could mean, both in terms of reducing the traffic challenges, but also the broad quality of life issues for being able to get to and from work. Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges that low and moderate income families face is like how far flung they have to go in order to live in Massachusetts, and how do they get to work then after that. My wife and I bought a house in Natick because we couldn't afford a house in Arlington or Newton. And then so Natick, which was formerly an affordable community, is now not anymore, and you keep sliding back, right? So so what does that mean for getting back into the system? So I think the public transit is critically important. I've also noticed that the commuter rail seems to be reasonably full again. So that's a great sign. You know, when I first started I live over by the West Natick station. When I was first getting on the train after the pandemic, it was the absolute ghost town. That's not really the case anymore. But I take your point on the traffic now, because if I'm driving and it's 7 o'clock in the morning and I'm at that interchange at 90, and you look to the west and you could land a fighter jet on and you look to the right and it's stopped. It's cars all the way back. So you know, we need to invest in that public transit system, but it'll be interesting to see the ways in which the hybrid work kind of changes things. But we were talking about that in the Transportation Commission as well. Like, I remember embarrassingly for me, one of the members of the commission said, well, we should think about what happens if some terrible terrorist attack happens and we all go inside for 2 years. And I was like, yeah. Well, what if sharks grow legs and they come on land? It's like we can't plan for this crazy thing. And then it was like, oh, whoops, that's almost exactly what happened, right? So yeah, so I think that creates another social issue, cultural issue within it. But yeah, the public transit system is important for all that.
So let's give a round of applause to Mark. Thank you so much. So thank you very much, Mark, for this interesting presentation. So good morning again. My colleagues and I are pleased to be here to present you with the update on the Greater Metro West economy. Some of the information that you will see in our economic update this morning is also available in your 2023 Greater Metro West Economic Profile book that you received today. So as Mark mentioned in his presentation, despite that Massachusetts has the highest per capita income in the country, but there are some challenges that we face today. One of them that we keep hearing is the higher inflation rate than usual, including price of energy and utilities that rose far more than the rest of the nation. So this obviously impacted our region as well. Our economy has changed since the pandemic, and there are some new challenges that we have faced today. So that's why the topic of our conference today is about navigating the rough waters of the economy. Now, our research has shown that the subset regions are generally quite different in many ways from the state and the nation as a whole. So that's why I think it is important for us to provide an update on our economic conditions on our substate economies. Just to remind everyone, the focus of our presentation is mostly on a region called Greater Metro West. Consists of these 13 communities. Out of those 13 communities, 4 communities are in the Greater Marlborough region, and they are Hudson, Marlborough, Northborough, and Westborough, and the rest of the communities are in Metro West. So the first topic that I would like to present today is about cost of living in Metro West. MERC regularly tracks the cost of living in the Metro West area by conducting a survey and calculating the average cost of a market basket of 61 items typically purchased by professional and executive households. From our calculation, we produce MERC Metro West Cost of Living Index. And please note that the data that we have here is for the 9 Metro West communities only. We do not survey the GMR communities. So the first graph that we have here shows the value of the MERC Overall Cost of Living Index from October 1991 to October 2022. And also please note that the base period for this index is April 2009. So if you look into the end of the line that we have from this graph, a value like 180 for the overall index in 2022 implies that overall prices in Metro West were 80% higher in October 2022 than they were in April 2009. And if we go back to 1991, the first year that MERC conducted this survey, it was recorded that MERC Cost of Living Index has increased from a value of 64.6 to 180 in 2022. or roughly it has an annual increase of 3%. Along the same line, when comparing 2001 and 2022, we see that the overall prices increased by 16% over the past year, confirming some of the inflationary pressure that we are all aware of at this point. Now, using the same base period of April 2009, if we look into subcategories index between 2019 and 2022, all categories that make up the cost of living index increased during this period, except for the health index, which declined between 2021 and 2022. Between October 2019 and October 2022, the largest increase was recorded by the housing index, followed by the grocery index. However, it is important to note that all of the subcategories that make up the cost of living index, it was housing that experienced the largest increase. The housing index increased from 133.2 in 2019 to 209.3 in 2022. This implies that Metro West housing costs was about 57 higher in 2022 than in 2029. So talking about housing, the first graph that we have here, talking about housing, shows us the single family median price in each community in Greater Metro West in 2022. Please note that these numbers that we have here represent a different mix of homes sold and therefore do not reflect the changes in the value of individual homes. It was recorded that the estimated median single family home price in Greater Metro West in 2022 reached a new peak of $744,000. And if we look into communities in Greater Metro West, the median single family home prices in Greater Metro West in 2022 ranged from $525,000 in Marlborough to $1,167,000 in Sherborne. Among communities in Greater Metro West, Sherborne and Sudbury posted the highest median sale price of more than $1 million. Now, if you look into the percentage change in the median sale price in each community between 2021 and 2022, all communities in Greater Metro West experienced increases in their median sale price. The largest increase was posted by Natick by 15.6%. So, Mark, I guess prices of houses in Natick increased the highest than the others, followed by Sudbury of 15%. And the smallest increase was posted by Wayland at 3.2%. So the next graph of housing that we have here shows the percentage change in the number of single-family homes in Greater Metro West. As shown by this graph, single-family home sales decrease in all Greater Metro West communities, with the largest decrease posted by Westboro, Southboro, and Hopkinton. In addition, Greater Metro West reported a larger decrease in sales than the state. So between 2021 and 2022, we noticed that single-family home prices increased and the number of single-family home sold decreased. Question is, do they consistent with the long-term trend that we have for the region? So in this graph, we show the long-term trend on home prices measured by the right-hand scale, showing by the purple line, and number of home sales measured by the left-hand scale, showing by the blue line. While the actual price and number of home sales fluctuated from time to time, we can observe that there's a long-term decline in single-family home sales, but long-term increase in single-family home prices over the last 36 years in Greater Metro West region. So the current condition that we have is kind of consistent with the long-term trend in terms of the home sales price as well as the number of homes being sold in the region. So now I would like to switch my presentation to the unemployment information in the region. So the first unemployment slide that we have shows the annual unemployment rates for Metro West, here showing by green, Greater Marlborough in orange, Massachusetts in red, and the nation in black from 1990 to 2022. So as we can see here, unemployment rates increased dramatically in 2020 due to the pandemic. Since then, there's a steady downward trend in unemployment rates. And in 2022, Metro West posted an employment rate of 2.9%, while GMR posted an employment rate of 3.3%. Metro West and GMR had lower unemployment rates compared to the states, and the nation of 3.8% and 3.7% respectively. And we can also see here that all regions posted lower unemployment rates in 2022 than in 2021. And the next graph that we have here shows the unemployment rates for the 13 communities in the region in February 2023. As we can see here, the highest unemployment rate in the region was reported by Hudson at the rate of 4.4%, followed by Marlborough at 4.3%. All communities in Greater Metro West posted lower unemployment rates than the state of 4.2% and the nation of 3.9% except for Hudson and Marlborough. On the other hand, among the 13 communities in Greater Metro West region, Sherborne posted the lowest unemployment rate of 2.5%. Now, since unemployment rate is actually a calculation or a ratio between the number of people who are unemployed and the number of the labor force, then we think it will be interesting to see these two important indicators, the labor force and the number of people who are unemployed. So here we have a graph that shows us the number of individuals in the labor force in the region measured on the left-hand side of the axis, shown in blue, and the number of persons unemployed measured on the right-hand of the axis, shown in red, from January 1990 to February 2023 in Greater Metro West. It is observed that the labor force in Greater Metro West reached its peak in June 2019 with more than 172,000 individuals, and then followed by a sharp decline following the pandemic. And in February 2023, the number of individuals in the labor force was recorded at 164,000 individuals. So clearly, this is consistent with the state data that the number of labor force in the region has not returned to its pre-pandemic level. On the other hand, the number of unemployed individuals reached its peak in May 2020 for almost 20,000 individuals, but has rapidly declined since then. In February 2023, Greater Metro West reported 5,689 unemployed individuals. So now let's see where those unemployed individuals reside in the region. Among the 5,689 individuals who were unemployed, about 1,300 of them live in Framingham, followed by Marlborough with almost 1,000 individuals. So combined together, Framingham and Marlborough contributed about 41% of the total number of people who are unemployed in the region. So in other words, 4 out of 10 people who are unemployed in Greater Metro West region live either in Framingham or in Marlborough. Now, if we compare the number of jobs and the number of labor force in the region, here we have the information of the number of jobs versus the number of labor force in the region from 1990 to 2021. The labor force consists of individuals who are either employed or unemployed and live in one of the communities in Greater Metro West, here represented by the orange line. And the number of jobs refer to jobs located in the local area establishments in Greater Metro West, represented here by the green line. So what we have here is job information for all sectors that are located in the region. In his presentation later on, Dr. Rosero will talk about jobs based on sectors in the next couple of minutes. Now, it is interesting to see in the period between 1990 and 1996, the number of jobs was less than the number of individuals in the labor force, implying that the region was a net exporter of labor. But notice how the change took place between 1996 and 1997. Between 1997 and 2021, the number of jobs exceeded the number of individuals in the labor force, making Greater Metro West become a net importer of labor. So now, let's take a look into the same comparisons that we just had by community. So here we try to compare the number of jobs and the number of labor force in each community in Greater Metro West region. As we can see here, Framingham provided the largest number of jobs of more than 37,000 jobs, while Sherborne had the smallest number of jobs with only 546. Now, among the 13 communities in the region, it was recorded that the number of jobs in Marlborough, Northborough, Southborough, and Westborough were more than the number of individuals in the labor force, implying that these communities were net importers of labor. In the remaining 9 communities in Greater Metro West, the number of the labor force were more than the number of jobs, indicating that these 9 communities were net exporter of labor. So I think I will stop here for my part of presentation. Dr. Luis Rosero will continue the presentation by looking deeper into employment in the region, as well as presented some results that MERC has from the last 2 surveys that we just did. So Luis, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everyone. Happy to be here today. I know that we've been giving out a lot of data, so I'll try to be as brief as I can. My name is Luis Rosero. I'm MERC director, and I'm also an associate professor of economics here at Birmingham State University. This is my 5th year, I think, as MERC director, and well, my 8th year, I guess, in Birmingham State University. So what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is I'm going to provide kind of an update on employment. And also, more importantly, I think I want to give you an update on 2 of our most recent projects, which are surveys that we are really excited to have done in the last few months. So we will, which I believe tie very closely to the topic of this year's conference, which is navigating the rough waters of the economy. As you can see, we're kind of in this uncharted, well, not uncharted territory, but certainly a lot of conflicting signals in terms of where our economy is going domestically, locally, and nationally as well. So before I start, I would actually like to just remind everybody that when I'm going to speak about employment in this section, I'm talking about where jobs are located. Montalino just spoke about unemployment, which tracks where people live. This is going to track where the actual jobs are located, in other words, by the establishment. So first, before I start, before going deeper into the details, both in terms of the communities, but also in terms of the super sectors, I want to kind of step back and look a little bit into what Mark was talking about earlier, which is sort of a bigger picture, and more importantly, how do we, as a region here in Greater Metro West, fit into this greater, big picture of what's going on. So I'd like to start by considering long-term patterns in Greater Metro West. The figure that you see here shows the annual levels of GMW employment from 1980 to 2021, followed by quarterly levels for up until Q4 2022, which is the shaded area. It is important to know that Greater Metro West, as Felina mentioned before, is made up of 2 sub-regions, and that is Metro West, which is in green here, and Greater Marlborough, which is in orange. As we can see from this figure, GMW employment grew in a mostly consistent manner following the Great Recession up until 2019. And then we know what happened. At that point, right before the pandemic, the employment level in Greater Metro West reached a peak of 192,000 jobs. But as we see immediately, as you see it on the dash line there, to the right hand of the dash line, employment conditions in the region changed dramatically and very suddenly. As a matter of fact, in 2020, GMW lost nearly 17,000 jobs, which is about an 8.8% decline in just that one single year. That being said, the good news is that we have since then experienced a partial recovery in terms of employment. And I say it's a partial recovery in our case because at least as up to the last observation that we have here, which is Q4 2022, our number of jobs in the Greater Metro West region are not quite up to where they were before. We're still about 8,500 jobs, or 4.4% jobs down from the 2019 peak that we saw. Moreover, well, as you can see from the last 4 observations there, most of the graph is yearly data. The last 4 observations are quarterly data, just given the constraints that we face when we collect sub-regional data by communities. It's a little bit of a technical issue there. And it exposes, it can expose us to seasonality issues. But that being said, what we can, I think, safely said is that while we're still in a partial recovery, the speed of recovery seems to have slowed down a little bit in 2022 for us. And I think I would say that probably has a little bit to do with, or maybe just more than a little, to do with some of the labor constraint issues that both Mark and Felina have spoken about already. In this next slide, I want to kind of, again, position ourselves relative to the state and the nation in terms of how we fare as following the pandemic, or at least after the pandemic started. This graph captures percentage changes in both, well, in Greater Metro West in green, and Massachusetts in red, and the nation in black. It shows the percentage change in the level of employment, average wage, and the number of establishments, again, between 2019 and 2021 annually. One interesting development in all of this is, and I think this applies for pretty much all of the areas that we have considered today here, is the different patterns, the different paths that employment levels have taken versus wages versus the number of establishments. The number of jobs in 2021 was still down in Greater Metro West, Massachusetts, and the nation relative to 2019. Moreover, GMW has seen a slower employment recovery relative to the state and the nation. So we're lagging a little bit behind that recovery relative to the state and the nation. On the other hand, average wages, and again, this is where the paradoxical aspect of all of this comes in, which I think, again, Mark kind of touched on already. We are seeing average wages in 2021 be much higher than they were before. In fact, relative to 2019, 2021 average annual wages were 13.5% higher in GMW, 16.2% in Massachusetts, and 14.2% higher in the US. Similarly, the number of establishments increased consistently throughout the pandemic. In fact, by the end of 2021, we had 4.5% more establishments in GMW than we did in 2019. Again, it's important to know that due to the data lags that I was mentioning before with the communities, we haven't yet quite captured in our data the very recent sort of threshold that Mark mentioned before, where we cross over from basically having a net, having more jobs than we used to before the pandemic. We're still underwater in a sense here, according to our data. All right, now going a little bit deeper into the details for a region, Greater Metro West in particular, this graphs shows that, it shows the GMW employment net change by super sector. GMW experienced a mild increase in employment between 2020 and 2021. During this year, there were about 2,200 net new jobs in the region. Again, this is between 2020 and 2021. That's part of that partial recovery that I mentioned earlier. This is equivalent to about a 1.3% annual increase in jobs in that year. By comparison, and again, this speaks to the sort of disparity between our recovery and the state and the nation. While we were growing at about 1.3% in our jobs as part of our partial recovery, the state was growing at about 3.9% and the nation at 3.4%. Again, a recovery, but we're lagging a little bit here. Out of the 11 industry super sectors that MERC tracks, 8 super sectors experienced growth during this year, period, 2020 to 2021. We see that most of the job gains in this particular year came from 3 sectors. TTU, trade, transportations, and utilities, which you see here in green, which added about 1,300 jobs. Construction and leisure and hospitality, each of which had 900 more jobs in 2021 than it did in 2020. By the way, in the case of construction, these 900 jobs represent a nearly 12% increase in the number of jobs in that 1 year. Maybe a testament to sort of our strong housing market. The 3 super sectors that did experience some job declines between 2020 and 2021 in GMW were manufacturing, which lost about 900 jobs. And I should mention here that if you go back to our presentation from last year, you'll notice that manufacturing was also a big job loser in the previous year after that. So something to keep in mind. Professional business services, or PBS, which is one of our largest super sectors in the region, also lost 700 jobs in that year. And information, which is our highest paid on average wage sector, lost 400 jobs. Another way to illustrate the state of employment in Greater Metro West is by looking into the community dynamics. And that's what this next graph shows us. This graph shows employment for each of the 13 GMW communities in 2021. In 2021, GMW had 177,200 jobs. Of those, 2/3 were located in just 4 communities: Framingham, Marlboro, Natick, and Westboro. The following values that you see here represent the percent change in employment between 2020 and 2021. So we're looking at percent change in that year. As we can see, 11 of the 13 GMW communities experienced employment growth in 2021. The largest percentage growth took place in Sherborne, Holliston, and Wayne. On the other hand, 2 communities actually saw their employment levels shrink during this 1 year. And those 2 communities were Hopkinton and Framingham, which lost 3.5% and 3.2% respectively, again in that 1 year. So now with that, by the way, we have a lot more information on employment in our books. I encourage you to kind of review our book as well, but I would like to turn our attention to some of our more exciting projects these days. We continue to collect data regularly, but over the past few months, we've worked with 2 organizations working on 2 surveys, which I will present to you now. The first one is that I'll talk about is the employer survey. This is our 3rd year collaborating with the 495 Metro West Partnership, conducting a survey of our local employers. This survey is very important because it gives us sort of a preview or a closer look at how our local employers are feeling about the economy, how they're doing, where do they see the economy going. So I want to share with you the results of this survey that we just completed. By the way, the survey closed about 5 or 6 days ago, so we're still processing the results. This is very fresh data, and we will be coming up with a report pretty soon, so keep an eye out for it. But I do want to highlight a few of the things that we already can tell from this survey that we concluded. So first, as part of this survey, each year we ask local employers about their perceptions of the current business conditions relative to the previous year. These are the results for this year's survey. Nearly half of local employers reported that business conditions were the same this year as last year. 32% said they were better, and 21% said they were worse than the previous year. Now, I want to put these numbers in context a little bit. And again, as we continue to do this survey, we are collecting sort of time series data on this, which will allow us to tell more interesting stories. But these are the results for the same question for the past 3 years that we have conducted this survey. As we saw from the previous slide, nearly 80% of respondents reported that business conditions today were better or the same than last year. But that being said, I think we need to dig a little bit deeper into these numbers. It is important to know that the percentage of people reporting that conditions were better than the previous year actually decreased by 11 percentage points from last year to this year. This also corresponds with a notable increase in the percentage of employers reporting worsening business conditions, a 7 percentage point higher this year than in last year's survey. Another question that we regularly track as part of this survey is more about expectations. And for those of you who have taken economics or are economics people here, you know that expectations are huge to us. So we historically ask this question. We want to know not just where the conditions, how they feel conditions are today, but where do they think things are going? And this is this next question. When asked whether they expect the economy in the 495 Metro West region to improve, remain the same, or worsen, this is what employers this year had to say. As a matter of fact, as you see here from this graph, responses were actually relatively split. About 36% of respondents expect economic conditions to improve, whether that's slightly or significantly. About 31% expect conditions to remain the same, and just over 32% expect the regional economy to decline, to worsen, either slightly or significantly. So again, I feel like the sense I'm getting from all of this, just looking at all this data, is that we are kind of, that inflection point that was mentioned before. I think we're trying to figure out where we're going here. All right. So finally, I would like to turn our attention to one of our latest collaborative projects. Over the last few months, MERC has worked with the Metro West Nonprofit Network to develop and carry out the first compensation and business survey for the Metro West nonprofit organizations. We are grateful to Anna Cross, who is here today and from whom you will be hearing soon, very soon, as part of our panel. for bringing this idea to us. I think this is, we're very excited to have participated in this project. This survey has allowed us to learn more about the challenges and opportunities by this large and important sector of our local economy. And I should add, a sector that we typically, sometimes, for better or worse, we tend to overlook. And so this is a good opportunity to kind of zoom into that sector and learn a lot from their challenges that they're facing, and more importantly, how we as an economy overall can support them to make sure they support our economy. About the survey, this survey ran from March to April of 2023. So again, it closed recently as well. And we had 131 responses for this survey. A full analysis of the results is still in progress and will be also published in the next few weeks. So again, keep an eye out for these results as well. All right, so a couple of things I want to say about the survey that I think relate the closest to our presentation today. I think the first one I want to highlight is who our respondents work with. I think is very telling of the sector, and we should keep in mind. So we had 131 responses. These respondents came from a wide range of sectors, as you can see on the pie chart. And again, we're still in the process of processing this data. Some interesting things have emerged about the participants. So here are some facts we have learned already about who participated in the survey, which, if it's representative, it would tell us a little bit about who our nonprofit sector, who our nonprofit sector is. So a few things. 57% of organizations that responded to the survey serve 80 clients or more each month. Nearly half of those respondents have annual budgets between $100,000 and $1 million. 84% of nonprofits in our region are run by female leaders. These organizations also have highly educated leaders, with 69% holding a master's degree or higher. And the reason why I'm presenting this here, and you will see it once we release the results more formally, is that there are stories. There's a lot of stories in the background of this data and who's running this institution, these organizations, and the future of these organizations in the context of the greater Metro West economy that is already facing a pretty tight labor market, especially in terms of retaining and attracting new workers for a very important sector again. So in terms of this year's conference, we believe this survey also speaks to some of the challenges faced by all employers in the region, which we have heard some already. When asked to name the biggest challenge to attracting and retaining workers, the most common themes that emerge were things like lack of benefits, low pay, lack of funding, and just a general difficulty of finding qualified candidates in the region. So again, a lot of the same topics that we have heard from other sectors as well. So I'll end here, but I'll just say that these concerns expressed by local nonprofit leaders relate implicitly and explicitly to the challenges and opportunities presented by the current rough waters of the economy. A labor force that is still not fully recovered, as we have seen in both Mark and Felina's presentation, rising cost of living, which again, they talked about, reduced business confidence in our own region, contrast at the same time with some of the lowest unemployment rates that we have seen in history. The highest ever average wages today, and this historical resilience that tends to characterize the greater Metro West economy. So we have this sort of constant, contrast of things going on here. So with that, at this point, I would like to thank you for your attention. I know we've thrown a lot of numbers at you. Given the time, I'm going to hold off on taking questions at this point, but Felina and I will stick around if you have any questions. And also feel free to reach out to us either directly by email or through our office, MERC office. We strongly encourage you to keep an eye out for our upcoming publications, including both of the surveys results. And with that, I would like to now turn things over to Dean Thomas, who will be moderating our panel discussion today. I'd like to say just a few words to introduce Dean Thomas. Dr. Patricia Thomas currently serves as the Dean of the College of Business here at Framingham State University. In her position as the founding Dean of the college, Dr. Thomas has been instrumental to building and nurturing relationships between the university and the local business community. So Patricia, with that, we truly appreciate your support of MERC, and thank you for being here with us too.
Thank you, Louis. At this time, I introduce our four panelists, fantastic Metro West leaders. So I invite to the stage Anna Cross, who is our Executive Director of the Metro West Nonprofit Network, Meredith Harris, who is the Executive Director of Marlboro Economic Development Corporation, Mike McAuliffe, Chairman, President, and CEO of Middlesex Savings Bank, and Sakishian, Director of Planning and Community Development of the City of Framingham. So I know we're running a little bit late, so we may shorten things a bit at this time. For each of you, as they introduce themselves to each other and get ready for this session, we'll just start off by asking each of them, at the top of their head, what are the top 2 or 3 words that are coming to your mind when you think about the challenges that we are currently facing in the Metro West region as we try to navigate the current economy? So I'll start with Anna, 2 or 3 words in terms of challenges that you can
Good
think
morning,
of.
everybody. I think for the nonprofit sector, and it's in line with, I think, everything we're hearing this morning, it's really around cost of living and housing for a lot of the workers who are nonprofits. And the second part is retaining and hiring staff. And these are direct service workers. So your childcare workers, your mental health providers, your folks who are directly serving populations in our community who are not making a wage, an average wage of $91,000 in Metro West, are making something very, very much smaller.
Meredith, what 2 words come to mind?
Sure. So I would also say, workers, when you're trying to find a workforce, from a business perspective and an economic development perspective, that's a huge challenge right now. Also cost, but from a different perspective, the cost to do business right now is rising, and interest rates, continue to rise. The cost of construction continues to rise. So it's difficult to find investment.
Yeah, I mean, not to repeat, but, being a banker and our customers, cut across households, businesses, small, medium, some large. I think the biggest challenge is that there's just not one challenge. There's a whole spectrum of challenges, and that is the biggest challenge. And you've heard of all of them today, not just in this region, but whether it's, interest rates increasing, inflation, supply chain, politics, war, technology. I mean, there is just a litany of challenges. So it's not like everybody can just focus on this one. And it cuts across, everything, businesses as well as households.
Thank you. First, can I introduce my team Framingham? We have the Mayor Szyczki sitting here, Sue Petroni, Rick McKenna from my office, and also Caesar, a student at Framingham State who's having breakfast next to the mayor on his second day of work. Pretty good. Pretty good, huh, Caesar? No, I think, we talked about housing, and the cost of housing is priority number 1, but it's everything. It's food, it's a cost of food, it's a cost of services, childcare. I had an opportunity to listen to our Lieutenant Governor speak about housing. We need to create 200,000 housing units. We're short 200,000 housing units. And it's something that the city is being proactive on through the leadership of our mayor, our council. I have our chairwoman of the planning board, Christina Johnson, sitting here. And through their leadership, increasing the affordability component of all these housing projects that are coming. But it's not just one ingredient, it's everything. It's a challenge, but it's an opportunity for us to produce housing, workforce. We live in the greatest state in the United States. And in this state, we have the best hospitals, we have the best industry, we have life science. A mile and a half down the street is Sanofi, and they produce a drug that keeps 10,000 people alive every single day. And we need to build upon that, and we need to provide a workforce so people can work there. So I see this as just a lot of challenges and opportunities, but it's something that we can overcome.
Thank you. So we've looked at the challenges. What, in your opinion, what are two words that you can think of in terms of bright spots that's actually happening in the economy right now? And I'll start with Stephanie.
Go first. I'm sorry,
Just two words in terms of bright spots in the Metro West region and in your particular sector.
in my, I would say that there's a lot of exciting activity happening in our downtown. We have a lot of new housing projects that are coming in front of us right now. Framingham, almost 7 or 8 years ago, had the leadership to create what's called transit-oriented development. And they put that zoning in place so that we could have housing built around MBTA communities. And we just received certification that the city of Framingham is certified as an MBTA community where we are going to create housing. We have an opportunity right now that they're so excited about the housing that we actually have a grocery store, Ciabra, that's going to spend $5 to $10 million of a brand new grocery store in downtown Framingham. And it's their first property that they've ever purchased in the United States. They've always been a leaseholder. And they're really invested in the town, in the city. And we look forward to having them come here. But there's a lot of excitement happening in Framingham right now with new business development and more businesses that want to come to our city.
Yeah, I mean, despite the challenges, you heard in Mark's presentation, Massachusetts, relatively speaking, is still an incredibly attractive place to live and work. I mean, our economy is very diverse. I mean, we have some, obviously the healthcare, technology, whether it's biotech, financial, and more industrial and distribution companies. So, and it's an attractive place to live for families. All you have to do is look around, the country, and you see some of the sort of climate things happening in different parts of the country. And, other than your occasional bad nor'easter that we get, Massachusetts, is pretty nice. And we have, you have access to pretty much everything you want around here: ocean, mountains, culture, you name it. So it's still an attractive place to live. And then add the universities and the intellectual power here in Massachusetts, which I think helps spawn new business, and then all the investment that comes along with that new business from people looking to invest into the state. So, so we have a lot of good things going for us, despite the challenges that we all face.
I think from a business perspective, even though it is becoming more and more difficult to find the workforce and to find the talent, we still do have the talent here. We're sitting in one of the finest educational institutions in Metro West, and we have a lot of access to talent, both in the Boston area, but in the Worcester area as well. We have great infrastructure. We're in a really good spot in the state of Massachusetts. You can get here from there. And even though it is hard to find investment, people are still making investments in our region. Marlboro in particular, I don't know if anybody's heard of a company called Moderna, just chose Marlboro as their future home for them. So we're excited to continue to see those types of investments, even though the climate can be a little tricky right now.
Yeah, and I would say it's our highly educated workforce. And I would also say it's our next generation of motivated problem solvers who really want to be involved in innovative thinking and innovative programs. We've seen that in some of the internships programs we've done with nonprofits. So I think it's also the energy of the next generation.
So with that said, I'll ask you some specific questions based on your areas, and I'll start with Anna. So Anna, one of the things we observed today in Felino's presentation was the challenges nonprofits face in terms of attracting and retaining workers. In your opinion, what are some specific actions that can be taken to overcome these challenges?
So thanks to the survey that was done, which was really a request on our part to really locate some of the data specifically for nonprofits to really understand benefits and compensation in the nonprofit sector. When you look at that statistic of 84% of your nonprofits are run by females, many of them are there with no benefits, without retirements, without things that are really supporting them leading those organizations. So I think for around issues of equity and parity, benefits and compensation for the nonprofit sector really have to be considered. The other is intentional pathways for professional development for young people coming in, paid internships, apprenticeships, co-leaderships, partnerships between businesses and nonprofits. We had a program this year to place nonprofit interns in nonprofits, and they had amazing experiences. But they were paid thanks to support from the university, because these were students who could not have those opportunities in any other way unless they were paid. So building that kind of a structure, that kind of a pipeline that then leads to those jobs that allow people to be in those different sectors, I think is really important. Dr. Nimi talked about context, and I just want to put some context around the nonprofit sector for us. There are 38,000 nonprofits in Massachusetts. 6,000 of them are in Metro West. $36 billion in wages through the nonprofit sector. Over 500,000 jobs are in the nonprofit sector. 18% of the total workforce is in the nonprofit sector. So this is not just my little animal rescue down the street. It is your Y, it is your museum, it is your education institutions. It is all of those places where true partnership could really be beneficial to both sides of the sector.
Thank you, Anna. Meredith, as we can see from this year's annual MERC economic profile, Marlborough accounts for 20% of the jobs in the Metro West. So it is undoubtedly one of the drivers of the GMR area. So with that being said, from your perspective, and given the current economic conditions, which economic sectors do you foresee thriving in the coming years in the city and surrounding communities, and why do you think?
And I thought it was interesting to see that the manufacturing actually, was a loss in the last year, because we're seeing manufacturing, advanced manufacturing in particular, being a big sector that's growing. The city's also, really taken a look at the life science, the biotech manufacturing, that type of industry, because the state is putting a lot of resources behind driving that industry here in Massachusetts. I was just at the bio convention the last couple of days, where the new governor came in and reinvested in the Mass Life Science Center, particularly in a program called Mass Talent. And it keeps coming back to this idea of we need to make sure that we're feeding the pipeline to continue to grow these industries. In Marlborough in particular, we're really trying to make connections between our business community and our schools. We're actually working on a program right now. I see Greg Bunn in the back with Mass Hire and QCC to talk about apprenticeship. We did a pilot program with Patriot Ambulance a couple of years ago that's really gone well, where students are actually coming out of Marlborough Public Schools with an EMT certification available to go work right out of school. And I think companies, in particular the life science and the biotech industry, that, typically or historically were not willing to take interns or folks that, maybe weren't 18 or plus. They're thinking a little bit more broadly about this topic and trying to think uniquely about how they can solve the problem of the workforce pipeline.
Thank you, Meredith. Michael, could you briefly talk about the current landscape in the banking sector, especially right here in the greater Metro West? What key trends are you observing these days as it relates to our economic future?
Yeah, that's to do this in 2 minutes is going to be challenging. If you had told me at the end of 2022 that the banks, credit quality, their portfolios were as good as they are, and ours are literally historically good in terms of the low levels of delinquencies and non-performing loans after the two years of the pandemic, and no one would have believed that. So coming into this year, I think all the banks were feeling pretty good, having come out of the pandemic and what their balance sheets look like. What happened with Silicon Valley Bank and then First Republic, I don't think anybody would have ever predicted. And frankly, it's nothing more than a good old-fashioned run on a bank. And what it did show is that the environment today is entirely different than what it would have been when you saw Jimmy Stewart standing in front of his customers, pleading with them not to take their money out of the Bailey Brothers building and loan. The speed of which that money went out of those banks, is mind-boggling. So that's what, the reality. So to be sitting here talking about deposits instead of loans Nobody would have ever thought that. But the dynamics that are in place right now that are very challenging for all the banks, and it does impact sort of what's, what you're going to see happening in the next 6 to 12 months is, we all live and die on net interest margin. We make loans, we take deposits, especially banks like Middlesex and the other, our peer community banks. And so when interest rates rise so rapidly in such a, short-term period, obviously cost of funds goes up. See CD rates in the 4.5%, 5% even, which is great for folks who have finally are getting, some interest on their money after, 8 or 9 years of earning nothing. But you're sitting, many people in this room are sitting on a mortgage in the 3% range, maybe even 2% range. So those are not going anywhere anytime soon. So our margins get squeezed. When interest rates go up, demand drops. A lot of people get priced out of the home mortgage market because the cost of buying a house has just increased considerably on a monthly basis. Business is the same way. Cost of borrowing goes up, demand goes down, projects don't fly, so demand drops, and we've seen that, and I think all the banks have seen that dramatically. So you have less demand, and then the other piece is what we don't lend out, sits in our investment portfolio, which for the most part, all the banks have, investment grade, fixed income interest, treasuries, things that are very safe, but they were at very low interest rates over the last several years. Quick rise in interest rates, almost every bank in this country has an unrealized loss in their investment portfolio of some amount. Nobody wants to sell a security and realize that loss. So to fund loans, and if your deposits are flat or even dropping, you can only fund a loan by borrowing, basically, from the Federal Home Loan Bank or this new bank term facility, which you're borrowing at 4.85%. So you've got this dynamic where demand's down, banks are very cautious about lending because of the dynamics of the balance sheet. And so they're taking care of their existing customers. So the supply is going to be strained and the demand's down. It's going to be a challenging environment, and it's going to be profitability is challenged as well for the banks. And when profitability is challenged, it obviously crimps the bank's ability to do more things in the community, and invest, support our great nonprofits that Anna described. It's just more challenging all the way around. And then you add all the labor stuff and inflation and all that. So it is a very challenging period of time, and it probably will be for the next 6 to 12 months. And hopefully the Fed will just stop raising rates. Stop.
And so SAC is building on that and looking at the city of Framingham, which is one of our biggest drivers in the community, having employed approximately 25% of the people in the Metro West. What do you see are the biggest threats and opportunities for promoting economic development for all residents of Framingham State, given the current economic conditions?
Regarding economic development in the city of Framingham, we're looking at our office parks that some of them are empty right now because of the pandemic, in ways to put energy into some of these office parks. Some of the complaints I hear is, can we talk about housing? Can we have a mixed use of housing in some of these office parks that have, seas of pavement? Can we put retail? Can we do more mixed use in some of these office parks around the city? So that's something we're looking at. We're also looking at entertainment. Entertainment, maybe, we look at some of these office parks. There's an interest to put this major Golf X facility at one of the office parks and infuse some energy with as far as entertainment goes. We're also looking at ways to, we look at Shoppers World, 750,000 square feet of retail. It has all the restaurants, all the grocery store that's under construction right now. Why don't we have housing there? We have one of the most reliable public transportation systems in the state, being Logan Express. How come we don't have housing where someone can get on the bus and take the bus right into Boston? It also could serve, you talk about Logan Express, it also could serve the folks that work at Logan. Folks that work at Logan can't afford to live in Boston because of the rents so high. So why couldn't they live in Framingham? But we're looking at, all these different opportunities here to change the zoning. to also change the way we do business. Being more business friendly, trying to get through the permitting process a lot quicker. These are the things that we can manage and that we can control. And so, with the mayor's leadership, the council's leadership, we're gonna make some zoning changes in the near future. That's gonna help this economy as well as housing. And it comes back to housing, providing more housing, affordable housing. And the city just recently changed our affordable housing requirement. It used to be at 10%, it's now at 13%, with 2% of the housing stock being at 60% AMI. So that will help the workforce of the people that work at some of these retail establishments and some of the young folks like Caesar who want to get his own apartment that can't afford to live here. So it's something that we are working on, and I just see that the future and some of these changes that we're making are gonna make the city friendly.
Thanks. So Anna, I'll get back to you again with another question. So as you mentioned, nonprofits play a significant role, but they're often understated in terms of what they do in our local economy. So with that, and given your role as executive director, how can nonprofits be better incorporated into the local economy to maximize the positive impact they make on our region?
I would begin by bringing them to the table. So I think this has been a wonderful opportunity for us to also amplify the voice of nonprofits, but bring them to the table as the resource that they are in terms of employers, as owners, as asset owners in our communities, as people who have labor participation, are working with organizations that can increase the labor participation. But bring them to the table as true partners who can contribute to these conversations around community development and economic development. I think that they are also uniquely positioned to provide a viewpoint from a grassroots perspective of what the issues are that people are facing on the ground, and that they can bring that to the table as part of those conversations. So I think the most important piece is bring them to the table and amplify the voice that they have as partners and collaborators.
Thank you. So Meredith, similar to Sakis, in your role as executive director, part of your task is to ensure that you promote Marlborough a lot better and make it a place where businesses and people want to invest and live. So with that in mind, what are some of the opportunities and threats that you see in doing that job and ensuring that the city is doing, the town, sorry, is doing as it should in terms of, building up our economy?
Sure. I think the biggest threat would be if you're out there promoting your community as one thing and you can't back up what you're saying. So I've been very fortunate to have an administration, Mayor Visions here in the room, as a business-friendly community. I hope that continues in Marlborough. I have every faith that it will. We have retirement coming up at the end of the year, so there's going to be a vacancy in our administration, but it's really important to continue to be business-friendly and to continue having conversations with folks like Gary Holmes in the room, the commercial brokers, the people that are talking to the companies on a daily basis, and making sure that they know what we have to offer. But that is something definitely that I worry about at times, because if you're out there at Bio International or talking to the brokers and talking to companies about what you can provide, and at the end of the day you can't deliver that, that's not a good thing, and that's going to hurt your overall reputation. So that's something that we really try to keep near and dear to our heart and make sure that we're following through on the promises that we make from day one of meeting somebody.
Thank you. Mike, how can the banking sector, especially local and regional banks, help to facilitate a healthy regional economy given the current turmoil that we are facing?
Yeah, so as a 188-year-old mutual bank that's been through many more difficult times than right now, the Great Depression, World Wars, we'll all get through this. But I think the what's so evident is that banks like us and our other peer community banks, regional banks, our entire success for the community is so integrally connected.
our success depends on the community and vice versa. And that goes beyond our business. It means getting involved in the communities, which we do, and I know our peer banks do as well. It's not just through financial support, it's through personal involvement in boards, and so that you're truly invested in the cities and towns and region that you're doing business in. And so, we're obviously a very heavily regulated industry, and given the things that have happened in the last few months, I suspect that's going to be even more so. So, we obviously have to go with the flow in that regard. But our job is to remain financially strong so that we will be here for the future. And the challenge is, once upon a time there were 20,000 banks in this country. Now there's 4,700, and there was 275 in Massachusetts, and now there's 100. And if you listen to the folks who want to project, there might be half that in 10 years. So, which is not a good thing, because again, when you lose the local connection to the communities, it just becomes different. And so, our job is obviously to be strong financially so that we can continue to be a part of the community in this region, indefinitely. I can tell you that our business is to help support the households and businesses in the Metro West region, and it's no more complicated than that. And we all will be successful together in finding ways to do that. I always love to give a shout out to the nonprofits, because having been in this job for the last 7 years and really gotten to know many of these organizations, you cannot overstate the importance and the incredible work that they do, as Anna mentioned, in many respects, without any benefits, with not a lot of pay. They are the true champions of these communities. Whether it's banks or businesses that have the wherewithal to help support them, that is an absolute critical need going, forever. Unfortunately, the needs don't seem to diminish.
Sakis, to what extent do you think the Greater Metro West would benefit from a regional approach to planning and community development in order to navigate these rough times? What do you think are some of the major challenges in doing that, and maybe what are some of the opportunities?
We talk about the one word regionalization, and it's something that for some reason we don't do well. Trying to get communities to work together. We need to pay more attention to that. Why don't we have a Greater Metro West Planning Agency? Why can't all these towns that you saw up here on all these screens get together and have one planning agency? Why can't we have one conservation commission? Rivers have no boundaries, wetlands have no boundaries. A wetland is a wetland, whether it's in Framingham or whether it's in Wayland. Why don't we have a conservation office that can basically regionalize that service? It's one of the hardest things to do in government, is to get communities to work together. Our mayor right now is working on a joint dispatch facility, a joint 911 dispatch facility. He has the leadership to purchase the building next door, and that's going to help with the labor force, because we can't get dispatchers to serve, and there's a need to have dispatchers in place. Why can't we regionalize that component? So that's something we're working on right now. But, MERC has produced all these surveys, and I've been in Metro West. I've lived here for over 55 years. And you've been telling us, and I'm going to go back to the housing problem, but you've been telling this all along, that we have a housing crisis coming. We're not producing enough housing. In the surveys that you've produced, I've been telling this story, and now we have to regulate that in some way that we can maybe change this around. But I think regionalization needs to happen. It needs to happen also with housing. Why can't we have our own regional housing task force in place to deal with this housing crisis that we have? But it's something that the city is taking their initiative on, and trying to create more regionalization. And the example is the 911 dispatch.
Thank you. I have more questions, but I think in the interest of time, I'll open it up now for people with questions. There's a mic right here at the center, so if you have a question, just feel free to come up and ask your question. and the panelists would do their best to answer. Don't be shy.
Question from the panel.
Oh. And no questions for me.
Can I ask my panelists to the left, the president of the bank, I was surprised to hear the number of banks that we have. And what do you think the future is in 10 years?
There'll be less, unfortunately. You know, obviously the current events have really shown that things are very different. And I can give you a ton of statistics, obviously, you know, with what happened and some of the comments that were made by some high-level government officials. We saw money, you know, go out of the small and mid-sized banks to the biggest banks because people said, hey, that bank's too big to fail, and you know, whatever happens there, they're going to be fine. And at the end of the day, banking is a trust business. It's a two-way street. We take deposits from our customers, and you know, it's our job and responsibility to protect those deposits and, you know, lend them in, you know, conservative ways. So when you see things like this happen and people just move money because, you know, they're afraid, basically. So, yeah, I mean, it's been happening for many, many years in terms of consolidation and mergers and so forth, and that trend is going to continue. And I guess the question is when, you know, and our goal, we're a mutual. We've never had any desire to go public, and we continue that. And so our job, number one priority in our strategic plan is to, you know, maintain our financial strength so that we can basically endure things like that are going on right now. So, and I know many of my peers have the same philosophy. So where it will end, I don't know, but it'll continue. And you know, frankly, that is a trend that's happening in every industry. Consolidation, I didn't mention that as a challenge, but I'm a commercial banker by background. I've been lending to companies in Massachusetts my whole career until I got my present job. And frankly, the consolidation that's been happening in every industry, you see a company that's been around for a long time gets bought by a company outside the region and it's gone. And, you know, that changes the dynamic of jobs in Massachusetts for that particular company. And that's happening, you know, in every industry. So that's another factor beyond banking. But I still think there'll be, you know, we're actually blessed because we have quite a few banks like us that have been around a long time. They're financially solid, and there'll still be, you know, plenty around even 10 years from now, but just might be fewer.
Funny you say that, because so I left the last listening tour in Worcester and thought, we're talking about the exact same things we talked about 8 years ago, or however many years ago it was when it was Governor Baker's listening tour. And so we have the same challenges. We need to really start thinking uniquely and try to solve the problems in a unique way instead of just saying, well, we can't do that because of X, Y, Z. And a perfect example of that, the MWRTA and the WRTA, two different entities that serve a similar area. They don't cross over. Why is that? Because they're operated by two different organizations, and it's just too bureaucratic and we can't figure it out. Well, that's really not an acceptable answer. We can figure it out. We can come to the table and try to find ways to bridge those gaps. Transportation continues to be an issue in this area. You know, in Marlboro in particular, we're running a shuttle bus. The city is running a shuttle bus from the Southborough train station to our industrial park to get commuters from both Worcester and Boston to jobs in Metro West. Why can't the state come together to try and figure out some of these problems and not leave it to the communities to have to be that resourceful? They can be that resourceful as well. So I don't know if that answers your question, but still a lot of the same frustrations. Well, and it's interesting. I mean, we had this conversation, again, I keep going to bio. I was there for the last 2 days in Boston, a lot of state folks and different people there, but, you know, really trying to think about how do we promote Massachusetts from an economic development perspective. We don't do that. We don't do it well. You know, you have what we call Team Massachusetts. There's a couple of us that go around the country talking to companies and site selectors and commercial brokers about bringing business to Massachusetts. I always say bring it to Marlboro, but we will ultimately want them to bring business to Massachusetts. But you don't have anybody at the state level that's out doing marketing on that to that degree, and they should be. We should be. You know, we can't rest on our laurels and think that business is going to continue to come here. Other parts of the country are doing exactly what we've been doing and promoting themselves the same way that we are as a life science hub and all these different things. We need to continue to keep our competitive advantage.
Thank you, Gary, and I can't take credit for that. I've only been here in Framingham for a year, but there were a lot of design charrettes that happened back in, I think, 2015, 2016, to talk about TOD, transit-oriented development. And they laid out the plans back then, and they said, look, this needs to happen. We need to have housing built around transportation. And so it got started. And one of the starts in the first 2 projects were giving actually tax breaks to some of these large housing projects so that someone would take the chance on Framingham. Someone would actually go in, build a project, a $60–70 million project, and actually get something built. But you have to maintain that. You know, you can't just say, okay, we're going to build this housing project and then we're going to walk away. It really takes the community, the volunteers. You know, we talk about these nonprofits, but, you know, we have, you know, I look at all the appointments that the mayor has to make. We have all these volunteers on planning board, on historic, on ZBA, and I think everyone was behind it. You know, you're sitting at a table with the chairwoman of the planning board in the city of Framingham, who, you know, attended a lot of these meetings, and we were fortunate that we had professionals that were actually on these boards to lead the charge. But we have to keep that maintained. We actually have people right now that are saying, well, it's too much housing in downtown Framingham. Why are we, you know, we have over 800 apartments before the planning board right now. 800. You're probably looking at almost $400 million worth of new construction housing in downtown Framingham. Hopefully, my friend right here is going to lend the money to all these developers because they're having trouble getting financing. Oh, by the way, you got to help us with the fireworks. I have to put that plug in too.
I got that.
All right. But it was that early leadership. Like I said, I just only came on a year, but the real estate right now in downtown Framingham is just taken off. I mean, we have, property being sold at doubled, almost twice as much as what the assessed value is for multifamily. One of the big things we did was changing the affordability requirement so we could get more, capture more housing units. And I just look at all the opportunity we have right in downtown Framingham. We've embraced the Brazilian community. I mean, you walk down, downtown streets in Framingham, all the restaurants are full. It's doing well. We have our downtown manager sitting back there, Riyadh, who's been reaching out to the community. Rick is on board. We have, public information officer, anytime a new business is open, leading the charge. So it's really been, I say, a team effort, but there was a leadership back years ago that really was able to drive that force. Christina has a question. She's raising her hand. No, you have to have the mic.
Building upon Mark's comment and Meredith's comment, I, as a economic development and planning professional, I have a lot of respect for Meredith and her work in Marlborough. I'm also the director of planning for the town of Hudson. So as you can imagine, I go to a lot of night meetings. That's just my life. But building upon your comment about how to improve the competitiveness of the Commonwealth, one thing that's always missed in this conversation, because it gets wonky, is a complete reform and overhaul of our state zoning regulatory framework. We're working with a regulatory framework that was last substantially updated, with the exception of the MBTA communities and the 3A components and some other modernization efforts in 1975. I'm old and I wasn't even alive in 1975. Doing a lot of reform efforts will help communities to do the right thing, to embrace housing productivity. Unfortunately, our regulatory framework is bureaucratic. It only favors those that own property. Those that own property and our abutters have the loudest voices in the process because they actually have the standing in the process. And that is how our permitting process is set up. And I will tell you as a board member, it is not easy. It is a thankless job. I tell the mayor a lot, I don't like this, and he tells me too bad. I have to keep going, but it's very, very challenging when the professionals and the boards that are responsible for doing this permitting are just working with an antiquated framework. And we don't do land use in a regional way, no matter how we slice it. We all should be working together. But unfortunately, Hudson has their land use, Meredith has their land use. I don't even know how you do land use in Marlborough. It's so different than the way we do it. And it just makes it confusing and makes us less competitive. And it's a hard legislative sell because it is very wonky when we start to talk about zoning and things like that, but it is so critical for unlocking the economic competitiveness of the Commonwealth.
If I could just add to that. So the way that we do it, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about being able to follow through on the promises that you make. Marlborough has, for the last decade, has been willing to go above and beyond and to look at the zoning and to try and make changes when we have a really good project in front of us, and to not get stuck in zoning regulations and things like that, and not be willing to work with the folks that are willing to invest in our community. We have time for 2 more questions.
Yes, my question goes to Mike. We've seen recently the emergence of mobile money kind of transfer, like Cash App, like Zelle, and all of those. How do you relate with these agencies? What is the future of this kind of relationship? And what should clients like us fear in that kind of relationship? Or what guarantees do you give us that that relationship is healthy and that we can trust even those like Zelle, like Cash App, which people are commonly using today to do business?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the invention of the smartphone changed everything, frankly, and online banking, mobile banking, has increasingly grown over the years. The pandemic certainly accelerated the use of mobile banking and online banking. We saw it dramatically. So, it's obviously an efficient way to do banking, and you can deposit things with your phone and all that good stuff. So it's all good from an efficiency and an ease of doing business. And it's not gonna, I would suspect it's just gonna continue to increase as obviously the younger generation who has grown up with technology, they're used to it, they want it. But that doesn't, mean that people don't want to interact face to face. And that's obviously a bank like us is still what we want to do. And so I think what you're seeing is all banks or, really companies and any institution, they want to be able to interact with their customers in the way they want to be interacted with, whether that's, mobily, phone. So it is a challenge, obviously, because you have to sort of address all of those delivery channels. But I suspect it's going to continue to increase in terms of the use of mobile apps and things like that. The challenge on the flip side is, security and fraud and things like that. And with the adoption of technology, you've seen dramatic increases in that side of the business. Zelle is one of those, which is owned by the big banks. It's just the bad actors go where the money flows are. So it's a constant battle of both trying to service your customers in the way they want, but also protecting them as well, quite frankly. But it's going to continue to increase in use for sure.
Any more questions? One last one.
Sarkis mentioned something about just additional regional collaboration. I'm just wondering what you guys think about the role that MERC can play in all of that. Like, and what role can MERC play in facilitating more regional cooperation and that sort of thing?
I think it's a big topic, and we're just talking about different land use and different zoning, and there's going to be a lot of things that have to come before we're able to really make some headway. And it's a great idea, and I think we should continue to move towards that. But it's definitely not something, to the point of the WRTA and the MWRTA, there's a lot of institutional things that would need to be changed in order for some of those things to move forward.
Yeah, you made the comment. I'm a native Massachusetts person. I grew up in Bedford, not too far away, and we're so town centric, and still so many towns are still town. Government needs reform as well. But the regionalization of so many of these things is so obvious, and yet we're stuck, and not addressing that.
I just think, the regional dispatch could be the start of it. I think we need a success story, and hopefully we can build off of that. But it needs to happen. It needs to happen, and it's not going to be comfortable. And sometimes I think problems really have to get to a head before it really where action can really, take place. But I think starting small and getting a good model, a good project off the ground is a demonstrated project, such as, again, the dispatch I keep talking about it, but it's needed. And, like you said, 351, cities and towns in Massachusetts, and everyone's stuck in their own little silo. So it's time to reach out.
Yeah. I do think specifically in terms of MERC, one of the benefits of having an organization that can be a neutral provider of data and be the people who can lift your eye up from your particular silo that you're in is really important. Because I think part of the regionalization challenge is like, I have this piece I have to protect and hold on to. And until I see sort of what the benefits to me are going to be around looking at a collaboration or thinking about merging or thinking about coming together, I think it'll always be a challenge. So I think having organizations, having people who can really step back and really look at the data and present it and make the story and the case for why regionalization pieces matter is really important.
Thank you. Thank you to
this wonderful panel, Anna, Meredith, Nye, and Saki, for such a thought-provoking and engaging conversation. And I now turn it over to Louis to close the day.
I'd like to register my name later. I'd like to register.
So thank you again, Patricia, and thank you to all of our panelists for a great discussion. Thank you once again to our keynote speaker, Mark Melnick. Thanks, Mark. It is really, I mean, I don't think we can overemphasize the importance of these sort of discussions. I think President Nimi at the beginning of today's conference mentioned the importance of just being in person, being able to talk to each other and having these discussions that sometimes we are stuck in our silos and can lose track of things. So I think this is, again, I share that view that this is very important that we have these type of conversations. And I have to say, it's music to our ears to hear the idea of regionalization. I think that's one of the things that we at MERC, for the past 32 years, we have been working on building that identity of what Greater Metro West actually means and what it is. And so we'll be happy to as Anna mentioned, to the degree that we can, contribute to that process and getting that communication started. I know it's not easy, but at least we can help, lead some of it, I guess. With that, I would like to now take the opportunity to give a few special thanks. First, to Framingham State University, our home institution. Again, they have been supporting us for the past 32 years. This is our 32nd year, 30th conference. And so we'd like to thank the university, especially the administrators who graciously joined us today. Thank you, Patricia, again, for all your work. We are also very grateful to our advisory board members, and in particular, Dave Bennett, who is really always there for us. And so we appreciate your constant support, and which is critical to the success of our center. So thank you, Dave. Of course, we'd like to thank elected leaders and planners and economic development officers and everyone who's here today for taking the time to be here to have these very important conversations. Of course, we'd like to also thank our sponsors who are listed here. Your contributions are very much appreciated. And a special thanks to Donna Olofsson, our office manager, who's in the back. Donna has spent countless hours, I know, over the last couple of weeks making this happen. So thank you, Donna, for all your work. I gotta say, MERC would not be complete without its interns. It's one of our foundations as a center. So we have a picture here of our interns. They make all of this possible. A lot of the work that you see here, there's a lot of interns in the background, and it wouldn't happen without them. So now I would like to, for those of you who are present here today, if you don't mind standing up so we can recognize you, our interns. Someone have been with us for almost 2 years now. And we're sad to see some of you leave, but happy to see that you are already on your successful track after college. So thank you. And then this concludes our conference. We wanted to thank you all again for being here, for your great contributions. And we just ask one final favor, and that is if you could please fill out this survey, which I believe is going to be distributed. Donna has it in the back. If you can just provide us some feedback about the conference, on the conversation today, I can almost see a topic for next year already. So any feedback you provide is very useful to us as we plan future conferences. With that, have a good day. And again, thank you very much for being here today.